I was very independent as a child. At the young age of 7, I was an equestrian and I rode horses, and my horse Jarful dug a hole of the front door of the stall. And when I walked out, my cowboy boot got caught and I hit face down and hit the front of my brain. We saw the impact, which was emotional dysregulation. And so I spent my lifetime understanding emotions, behaviors. I became very observant. Why are people feeling the way that they feel? And I was very intuitive. I understood natural health. I was a bodybuilder. I was benching 185. But it wasn't until I was 50 years old that I really understood really innately who I was, because I had all these signals from childhood up until that time that I, of course, like everybody else, ignored. Shortly after both parents had passed 18 months apart, I went on disability. I was sleeping on the couch, couldn't move. I was sedentary. I ended up with 54 chronic conditions at the end of the game. And they started coming in and being my guides. It's your innate ability, it's your divine right to hear God, spirit, source energy, Jesus. You choose. Your higher power is love. Everything's rooted in love. I use plant and energy-based healing, from poisonous pills to plants and prayers, because that's what we all have to do if we want to live our best life. We're here to reframe mental health for the world. If you have a diagnosis or label as bipolar, schizophrenia, narcissistic, Alzheimer's, what I'm here to tell you is all those things are just labels that the Western Medical Club uses to create a revenue stream. I'm here to give you another option. We help that dark energy find the light. And I created this concept called the place of peace. It's a quick and easy way to bring yourself back into balance using nature's goodness, using God's goodness, divine's goodness, because life is a lesson. When we can become self-aware about what it is that we're doing, how we're being perceived, life becomes beautiful. The single most important thing is forgiving yourself and forgiving others, because they are doing the best they can. You're doing the best you can at any point in time. We're all on the journey.
Jodi, what a pleasure it is to have you on Speaking Naturally. And you're a former gymnast. You were also a bodybuilder. You
Yes.
got very sick. And am I right in thinking you had 29 chronic conditions? How on
Well, actually, that was an old number.
was it? Oh no, you had more.
So when I wrote the book,
Yeah.
and then I started going through all my medical documents, I counted up 54.
Come on, tell us some of the big ones.
Okay, small fiber neuropathy, diabetes. I had, oh God, I have to look at the book because I don't bring it into my field anymore. Well, because, like if I live in the past of my life, then I'm bringing the past into my present situation, because our
Nice,
thoughts become things.
nice
So
point.
yeah. So I
So,
had
so, so
arthritis.
how did it manifest? I mean, you had this amazing health, obviously, as a younger person. What age were you when everything started to go pear-shaped?
Well, so it's pear-shaped. I love that.
It's
Okay, so it's
it's an unhealthy pear.
interesting because you know, there's actually two questions in there, right? When did it go pear-shaped? But when did I notice really that it went pear-shaped? When it went pear-shaped is when I was 7. When did I notice? I was 30.
Wow. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So how did it manifest?
So the first thing that happened is I hit my head. I was an equestrian. We rode horses, and I was in the stall, and I was cleaning out the stall and was with my horse. And as any equestrian knows, horses tend to like dig holes, right, with their hooves. And he did it right in front of the front door. And
Right.
I'm wearing my cowboy boots, and my boot got caught in that hole, and I went face down, planted my face on the cement outside the stall, and I hit my prefrontal cortex. Now, I also didn't, what, I didn't realize until later is that I also damaged the occipital lobe because, I'm a brain health professional.
Proper, yeah, traumatic brain injury.
I had a TBI.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and it was never diagnosed. But I didn't understand. Here are two key indicators. One, words were jumping all over the page. If
Mm.
you are listening to this and words jump all over the page when you're reading, that's not how your eyes are supposed to work. And I didn't know.
Let alone your brain.
Pardon me.
Let alone your brain.
Right, right. Let alone your brain. So the other thing was, and I have a letter from my third grade teacher, Miss Wallishin. She wrote, Jodi is finally learning how to write complete sentences. Now, by any standards in the third grade, I should be able to write a complete sentence. Would you say?
You would think so.
Yeah, but I couldn't. And I couldn't because I had brain damage. And then you couple that with the genetically modified foods that were in our environment. And by the time and I'm a bodybuilder and I'm doing all these things and I appear healthy, okay, I look good. On the outside, I'm looking good. I've got ripped abs. Yet I'm eating a box of ho-hos, okay, or a box of, Twinkies before a workout as a gymnast. And they're telling me that I really should cut down on the sugar and start having diet soda. And I'm like, well, first of all, I'm not fat, right? Well, what they didn't say was that the sugar is lighting up 8 pleasure centers of the brain, right? Making me incoherent. Right? You kind of know where I'm going here, right?
Opioid addict. Yeah.
I was an addict. I was a sugar addict.
Yeah.
And so now I want to throw, like, the people who are listening to this, let me throw you some grace. This is not your fault if this is happening to you with the sugar. Back in the 60s, there was a psycho scientist, Howard Moskowitz. And what he did is he created what's called the bliss point. And the bliss point is a formula, literally a formula for addiction. And what that formula was is the exact amount of sweetness, sour, and salt in the processed foods, like think about spaghetti sauce, right? Um, that has you crave more.
Yeah.
So now, if your mom and dad are eating processed foods and you're in the womb, you actually are creating cellular memories for addiction. Do,
Sure, sure.
yeah.
So tell your parents, and we're going to get on to the really interesting stuff because it's really your health transformation journey. But just on that sort of epigenetic point,
Mhm.
what was the diet of your parents like?
So, so my mom was a good cook, but we didn't know what we didn't know. Like in other words, they were making a lot of things from scratch. TV dinners had come out, so we were doing TV dinners like on weekends and things like that. But because I was born in '63, um, my parents, my dad had a really good diet at the house. He taught me about protein shakes and barbells. However, he was also going to McDonald's and Burger King, and so I don't think things are the same in the UK, and you'll have to tell me, but in the United States, they're using a ton of chemicals in our food supply, at McDonald's and Burger King, and any other fast food place. Not all of them, but I noticed that people in the UK, that the food is created differently. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, you know, in essence, we work on this very issue, both sides of the pond. And essentially, if you want to use something that isn't a food, it's got to be a food additive. And Europe has got a very limited range, about around about 400 approved food additives.
Right. Mhm.
Everything else is not approved. Whereas in the US, you've got this grass list, foods generally regarded as safe, all was trucking along very nicely when it was first launched. Then in 1997, they decided to do self grass, and you've got now 10,000 additives. So this is
Okay, and I thought it was 9,000. Okay,
yeah,
so it's higher. Yeah.
it's actually over 10,000 of which, you know, a few hundred of them are very regularly used, but you only need to look at processed foods in major multiples, or look at confectionery or cereals given to kids. The very same product, whether it's a Haribo confectionery or it's a Kellogg's cereal, with the same brand name, slightly different packaging, but the ingredients list between the US and Europe totally different. And
Right. So we have seen those comparisons all the time, side by side on Facebook,
yeah,
LinkedIn, and people are in the United States are finally waking up to the fact that we have all these food dyes in our cereals, like just as an example, like you said, and also like in salmon, and they're connected to um, the labels ADD, ADHD, cancer, like you name it, right? But the truth of the matter is, these companies are actually creating the disease, and then
yeah.
they're creating the solution for the disease, and they're
Correct.
getting paid on both ends.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that America sits, 80th in the global rankings of healthy life years. One of the other things, because I travel so regularly between the US and Europe, one of the things I really notice is sweetness intensity. I mean, there are very few salads in a restaurant in America that I can eat based on the sweetness of the dressing used on the salad. The
Mhm.
amount, or you eat any Asian meal in America, the amount of sugar that goes into a so-called savory meal is makes it almost inedible for a European palate. So slowly but slowly, it's not just the additives, it's also the acclimatization to the sugars that, as you rightly say, are essentially they light up the reward pathways, the opioid pathways, and we become slowly addicted. I really think in America it's time to focus on restaurant foods, on processed foods being sold, on the sweetness of those foods, that sugar intensity, and start the process of helping young people to kind of detune from that level of sweetness. And then they move from high sugar to sugar replacement, and these
Oh,
non-nutritive sweeteners, they basically still trip up the same systems. In fact, there's a lot of good evidence to show that they trigger insulin, and you still are as likely to be pushed into all these people drinking all that Diet Coke, for example, are still being pushed into pre-diabetes, and subsequently diabetes. So yeah,
yeah. I mean, I was diabetic, and then I reversed it, you know,
amazing, amazing. So
and
look, tell us about. So you got this huge realization that you got there's multiple comorbidities. You're really sick. You've been super healthy. Obviously, you just didn't go to your local family physician and find a magic pill. So what happened?
so okay. So great question. First of all, there is no magic pill.
Thank you.
It always takes a village to raise a child. And it took a village to raise me. I was a child, and now I'm here to raise a village for others, right? Raise their children. What did I do? Well, first, I stopped going to the psychiatrist who put me on all those drugs. Because I was on disability for 4 years
Oh,
and a little over actually. And the attorney who was assisting me with getting benefits, disability benefits for those years, asked me a really interesting question. He said, Jodi, he says, why are you still going to that doctor if your health is on the decline? And you have to really think about that. Many of us, I am not alone, Dr. Rob, that we expect to get worse with age.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I assert, shift the expectation. We are not supposed to get worse with age. We're actually supposed to get better. I know many, many men and women who are at the peak of their health in their 60s. Okay.
Hey,
And
I'm one of the I'm 3 years older than you. I'm 60. I've turned 65. I'm healthier now than I've been at any other stage of my life. So yeah,
exactly.
we're there. Yeah.
Exactly. Me too. And don't get me wrong, I have room to grow, right? Um,
Just not around the abdomen.
not around the I so love your humor, right?
Sorry.
So going back to what did I do? So first of all, um, I want to back up and tell you that I stopped seeing the psychiatrist. I told him that if you can't help me without putting me on more drugs, then I need to find a different doctor, right? Um, so I did go to medical doctors at first. I will tell you that. Um, and so I'm very spiritual, as you know, and now your listeners know. And I was laying on a couch because I couldn't.
Was that something that came to you later, or from a young kid you were really understood that there was way more beyond the physical?
I knew there was way more beyond the physical. I had no concept of it, but I was always hearing. And that's part of why I got that misdiagnosis of having bipolar disorder and schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Because, like when my grandmother died when I was 18, I heard from God grandma's passing, right? And then, I went down to the down to see her in Chicago and helped her pass. When I was uh, in my 30s, my brother, he did not die at that time. But this is a very interesting story. I put my hand on a knob of the door of where I lived, and I go to turn the doorknob. And as I'm turning the doorknob, Spirit says to me, you will have to understand what it's like to not have your brother around. They didn't say die,
Mhm.
they said not around. I walk in, the phone rings. Matter of fact, I had just come back from the UK, okay, at that time. And the phone rings, and I get a message that my brother had a seizure on the beach in Florida.
Wow.
And he had a brain tumor from
Mm.
putting the phone at his head. Okay. He lived for 23 years. So he was alive, but not around,
Yeah.
right?
Got it.
Because he
Got
wasn't
it.
present. He couldn't be. His brain was now shot. And so I'm always getting these messages, or which I think many of your listeners can connect with. You're thinking of someone, and then all of a sudden that phone rings.
Yeah.
That's just a little um, cue that we are connected energetically.
Yeah.
And when you think about the science on that, what do they measure the brain with?
Yeah.
EEGs. It's
Exactly.
electrical waves.
Everything is electromagnetic, and we do have terms for it. Extrasensory perception. We know
Mhm.
there's nonverbal communication. We also intuition for me is one of the big senses, and yet we are taught not to trust it. And it may just be one of the most powerful senses that we have because it pulls in all the information in all domains, including electromagnetic.
Well, and they measure the heart with an EKG.
Exactly.
And there's another, and I forget what it is, but they can measure the blood electrically too.
Yeah.
And
And
so this is spiritual, mm, spirituality and science. We're always supposed to be connected. If a scientist is connected to God, he can help heal the world.
yeah. Yeah.
If a scientist is not connected to God, you're going to get things that do the opposite. And I actually connected you to a man who's been on my podcast twice now. And I would invite your listeners to follow Dr. Gary Montemayor. He's in the Cayman Islands, and he has the same mission as you do. And
So
he,
so looking forward to meeting him.
Mhm.
The problem with science is that typically scientists are arrogant, and so even if you look back historically, scientists hold a position in which they feel like they're all knowing, but they're all knowing at that specific juncture in time.
Mhm.
Can you imagine if we were to look back at what is what scientists of today's era are saying about the world around us, in the sense that they have this deep understanding of processes of what's going on, biologically, environmentally, politically, economically, etc. And the reality is, in 1,000 years, we'll have a very different perception of it. In 10,000 or 100,000 years, a very, very different perception of it. So scientists tend to be quite arrogant in terms of they think that they know a lot. And that's been one of the humbling things for me over the years. The greatest scientists that I've had the pleasure of talking to or working with have all been deeply humble people. And they all say, you hear it in different ways, but we know so little, you know.
Thank you.
And also the other thing that is often said, the more we learn, the more we understand, that the less we know, you know.
KDK zone is what I
Yeah,
call it.
exactly,
Well,
exactly,
you don't know what you don't know. And
exactly.
so I'm very humble. Now, when I started with my downloads, I would say I was not as humble as I am now, because what I learned is the same thing a scientist will learn.
Just can you just explain so people understand your downloads?
Thank you.
How do they happen?
So they're spiritual downloads. I pray a lot and I meditate a lot, and I treat my body as sacred space, meaning I don't put any toxins in my body. I have clean water, clean food. I pray for my food, which actually changes the cellular DNA. There's science on that.
Mm,
Um, and eventually, when you pray, there's kind of this pathway between the physical, spiritual body, mental body, and a higher power. And for me, that's Jesus. And and Jesus, in my opinion, came in many different forms. So he could also be Buddha,
mm,
choose.
yeah.
Um, and so that when I pray and I hear, the response is the download.
Mm, got
So
it.
one of the myths that we were debunking on a podcast with these women, Code Health, that use frequencies in saline solution, which is just amazing way to deliver a frequency. Um, she said, "Well, what's the one myth you want to debunk?" I said, "Well, people pray and they don't expect an answer.
Mm,
The download is the answer. The
yeah.
download is the communication from a higher power to you.
It's got to be a two-way process. Not a
Two-way street." And that's exactly what I said. It's a two-way street.
Amazing, amazing. So look, the I'm fascinated by, in your book, obviously the emotional part is critical, and to some extent, when people look at the growing mental health problem,
Mhm.
they think of a mental health problem as a psychiatric problem, perhaps a psychological problem, sometimes a psychosocial problem. They don't so much think of it as an emotional problem. And obviously we have, seven primary emotions. We've got a whole bunch of secondary emotions.
Mhm.
Um, you essentially, your thesis, one of your many theses, I should say, is that you can reframe the way in which we do mental health
Mhm.
through the lens of emotion. And you kind of, underneath that, you have a canvas, which is this sort of mind body spirit canvas that's well known in the East, well known in traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda. It's been almost disemboweled, if I can use that term, in by Western medicine. But so, talk to us about the role of emotions in mental health.
I love to. Thank you. So first, I'm gonna address a couple things. First, I want to address we've also reframed TBIs, right? So what's a TBI? Someone getting hit in the head with a blunt force object. And I said, well, knowing what a chemical will do to the physical body and what it will do to the brain. And there's tons of science, if you look on Amen Clinic's website, that suggests what chemicals will do to our brain. And you have underperforming parts of the brain where it's not getting blood flow. So I said, how about we reframe TBIs, that every time you're exposed to, like, you walk into a room, it's filled with a chemical, air fresheners, someone's washed, the floor with your local chemical company stuff, and it hits you, you're like, your brain just stops, the blood flow stops, right? So that was the first reframe. The second reframe was about how those same chemicals are not only causing a TBI, but are causing emotional dysregulation. Okay. And that emotional dysregulation is part of what the chiropractic community started years ago calling the 3 T's, which is toxins, traumas, and thoughts, right? So your toxins, traumas, and thoughts are causing us to disassociate, okay, which is a Western medical term, okay, for psychologists and psychologists. If you don't know what disassociate means, it's kind of like your physical body and your spiritual body are disconnecting, right?
There's a difference between dissociation in psychology and disassociation as well. They're two separate concepts, are they not?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And and I'm not a psychologist, right? I'm a spiritualist, really, with a lot of science.
Yeah.
But here's what um your readers or your listeners want to know. Um, this is the reframe. Number one, treat your body as sacred space, because when you don't treat your body as sacred space, the physical body and the spiritual body separate. Okay, and the spiritual body jumps out and goes into another timeline and or dimension for a mental vacation. Well, if you're listening to this and this seems a little odd to you, good job. That's how I felt. Okay.
Mm.
So I flew out to Vegas to the Redefining Medicine conference, and I went to share this with Dr. Patrick Porter, who is the CEO of BrainTap and a
He was
neuroscientist.
going to be my next question. I want to talk about Patrick, but yeah, bring it on. Bring it on.
Yeah, yeah. So because I'm a little concerned, I'm like, Patrick, this is my download. This is what God is telling me is happening. Okay. To people. And I had witnessed this in my life in a multitude of relationships, because you can actually see the physiology change for that person. Like their eyes are different. I'm frozen. Interesting. Okay. So you can actually see the physiology change on that person. Like their eyes will be different, their skin lays on their body different. And if you start looking at pictures side by side, you will see the difference. You just need to have some discernment about it. And why are they different? Because the soul from that like an ancestor soul, when that other soul jumps out, the original soul, another soul jumps in, and it's usually an ancestor. And so I was like, this is a little weird. So I fly out, I meet with Dr. Patrick Porter, CEO of BrainTap, neuroscientist, and also teaches at Quantum University in Hawaii. And I said, Patrick, I said, I thank you for endorsing my book. I started with gratitude, right?
Yeah.
And I said, you might want to you might want to hear my download before I publish the book, you know. And he said to me, he says, Reverend Jodi, he says, it happens no other way. And then he said, and there's also this: people become fractured. Let's say you had a traumatic event as an 8-year-old, okay, or a 7-year-old, and it fractures you a soul fracture, and you jump out of body and you go into another timeline or dimension. Now you live your life, and let's say the next year you have another event that triggers you from that original event. So let me give an example because it's getting too vague, okay? So let's say you get into a fight with your sibling, and the sibling crosses a boundary. They take something of yours that doesn't belong to them. Now, a few years later down the road, somebody else does something similar, or they resonate in the same frequency. That 12-year-old or that 80-year-old is going to come out of that other dimension, pop back into the body, and take over and fight that fight. You'll recognize it as a trigger, but it's actually a fractured soul. And there's a way easily through prayer to heal fractured souls, and medicine will not do it. Now,
It's
plant
really
medicine
because
might.
when you say that, a psychiatrist or a clinical psychologist would say, wow, what you're talking about is something that's very, very similar to a kind or two types of mental health problem that are growing at a spectacular rate at the moment. And one is narcissistic personality disorder. The other
Mhm.
one is borderline personality disorder.
Right.
These are two. And what you're describing, obviously, they leave out the spiritual dimension because they're not looking at it. But in every other respect, it's there. There is the trauma. It can be psychological, it can be chemical, it can be physical. Um, and it happens at a very specific time in
Mhm.
someone's life, often when there's stress, when there's insufficient love. Sometimes it can actually happen, it can happen from under nurturing, but it can also happen from over nurturing. And that basically sets up this pattern where there is this complete fragmentation. And in fact, the what we really see as the human being, the being, which I think we all know, even for those who do not have a spiritual consciousness, is something so much more than just a brain and a body. It is the spiritual dimension, but they leave
Well,
that
the
out.
brain and the body are just honestly, that's just a body bag.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
who you really are is a spirit that is having a physical experience here on the earth. And I want to just share something about you said about over nurturing and under nurturing. Do you know when most children get compromised?
Within the first 1,000 days.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know about the UK, but in the United States, there was this thing where just let them cry themselves to sleep. Let the baby cry. Don't ever do that.
Mm.
Hold
Yeah,
your baby,
yeah,
love on your baby, and do not fracture the soul of your baby.
yeah,
No,
yeah.
no, 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 no.
We're a planet of fractured souls now, and the
Yes,
fracture
we are.
is just getting deeper and deeper. So I interrupted you. You were on the fragmentation, okay? So that's a critical part to understand. Take us, what happens after that in terms of this relationship between emotions and mental health and the loss of spirit, of soul.
Well, so people are walking around with fractured hearts in addition. So the soul fractures, the heart fractures, and they're walking around feeling empty. Then the doctor gives them a pill for that, which fractures them even more and keeps them disconnected from spirit. And so, we have this first trauma, let's say, is a physical trauma. They could either be of a car accident and they could have an argument, and then they get a pill for that, right? So anti-anxiety pills, pain pills, and all that other stuff. And that's fracturing the soul on another level, a deeper level. And this now can be measured by that gentleman, Dr. Gary Montemayor. He can actually measure these soul fractures. He can see them
And
with.
and when we look at, say, the frequency or the photonic biophoton output of a human being, so we often refer to, say, resonance, and we know that high resonance people are healthy, low resonance they're less healthy. Can that be measured as an electromagnetic output?
As I understand it, yes, that's what he's doing now. And and he's got tons of science on it, and he's publishing another book on it. But I think he's using what's called a BioWell device.
Yeah, okay. That was on the top of my mind. Is he using Barwell? I'm very familiar with Barwell technology. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I am not yet.
Okay.
I am a student on the measurement of what we do. That is his expertise.
Okay.
Uh,
No.
but I do know, and this, so what I'm going to tell you is that the information I'm sharing with your listeners today came from God. They were all downloads. And then the scientists are all telling me this is exactly how this works. And so I would encourage people to understand that you are spiritual before you are physical, and that the more that you pray and the more that you connect to God, the more that you can hear what's important for you. Because what I did to heal myself is going to be different than what you need to do for you to heal yourself. You know,
Yeah. There's one trademark phrase that caught my interest because it involves five P words: poisonous pills and produce to
Mhm.
plants and prayers. That's the direction you're taking people in, and you've managed to get, poisonous pills and produce to plants and prayers. So you trademarked it. Tell us why you trademarked it and how can it help people in their journey?
Well, I trademarked it because we really want to, uh, I mean, it's an important message, right? And it just gives credence to how important this message is. And I was guided to. Um, and where is it leading people? Was that the second question?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, the poisonous pills and produce. We've looked at the medications. The produce is the all the ultra processed foods and the junk foods that people. So
Mhm.
you've got plants. I was interested in the sense that do you believe in a exclusively vegetarian or vegan diet?
I don't. So I eat meat, right?
Okay.
But
So it's just
uh,
predominantly plants. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I do eat predominantly plants. But I mean, it's very
I'm the same.
interesting.
I'm the same.
Um, at the beginning of my journey, I had 135 food sensitivities.
Yeah,
Most of them were to plants because I was consuming health like capsules. I don't want to use the brand name. Um, and they were made from real food. And
mm,
someone told me to double up on that. And as a result, I had hives and developed food sensitivities because my body was in a traumatized state. And
yeah.
when your body's in a traumatized state and you eat that food, you then develop food sensitivities to that until you reverse the trauma, which I help people do.
I mean, it's part of the classic journey towards autoimmune disease, where the body um, learns no longer is able to distinguish between self and non-self. And because
Exactly.
plants have so many compounds in them, the body goes, "What on earth are you throwing at me?" And goes, We think this is foreign, and we're going to alert the immune system." And that's one of the reasons that a carnivorous, diet, a meat-only diet can be helpful medicinally. I think the evidence is very, very clear. Long term, if you leave plants out of the equation, you almost certainly cannot consume sufficient antioxidants and other compounds that fire up a whole bunch of different pathways that have co-evolved with diets. But meat can be a critical part of a diet. I also
Well, meat was part of my
well
healing
without it.
journey.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, I actually could only eat meat and maybe 3 or 4 fruits and vegetables when I lost the 100 pounds or 92 pounds. So because I gained 235 pounds, I was up to 235 pounds when I got that misdiagnosis, and nobody thought it was a bad idea that they put me on 50 pills, and um and I ballooned up to 235 pounds from
mm,
being a bodybuilder benching 185.
yeah,
So
yeah.
so no one thinks that's a bad idea. But going back to eating, I do eat meat. I mean, meat is very healthy. It's got amino acids. You need the protein,
You eat
building
you
blocks.
eat meat. Do you still push weights?
So I'm just starting again because
I'd love
I
to know what
had
your training regime is. I mean, are you're back into it?
Yeah, I am. So I do it at home because I don't like going into gyms, and I don't go into gyms because they're filled with toxins.
Yeah.
So I'm limited in that realm. However, my regimen in the morning is I wake up in prayer. So I start with prayer because I get my marching orders from Jesus. These are your priorities for the day, right?
Mm,
And then I go walking outside. I have weights here in the house, and I'm usually doing, the tricep press, right? I can't
yeah.
go back
Yeah.
there, but yeah. And I'm doing, I don't do bench presses anymore, but I'm using mostly barbells.
Okay.
And then I'm using calisthenics. So, I'm 61
Yeah.
years old,
Yeah.
and then I go hiking in the mountains.
Amazing.
So um, for me, there I have an opportunity still to improve my health. The last 2 years was a very interesting, an additional health journey outside of the first one. So in the first health journey, um, I show how I was misdiagnosed. Well, the last two health journeys, I show how I reverse disease without intervention
Drugs.
from Western medical. And so
Yeah.
what happened to me, or for me, is one, I was exposed to 15 smart meters on a bedroom wall when I moved to Georgia. And those 15 smart meters resulted in four brain tumors, a failing liver, failing kidney, weak heart, weak lungs, clogged spleen. And I had a doctor diagnosis, and there's a podcast where he comes in and talks about it. So
Wow.
as he's leaving my home, he says to me, Jodi, I won't lie, it doesn't look good. Like he's telling me I'm going to die.
Gee.
Okay. And so
How long ago was this, Jody?
2 years ago, 2.5 years ago.
Amazing.
Yeah. And so I um, bought two PEMF devices.
Yeah.
Okay. One for the bottom and one for the top. And I cocooned myself in those PEMF devices, and I wrapped the PEMF
Just
device.
for our listeners,
I
PEMF
heard
stands
that.
for
Yeah.
pulsed
So
electromagnetic field. Just
Yeah.
yeah.
And yeah, pulse electromagnetic frequencies,
Frequency.
right?
Yeah.
And what they do is they're sending healing frequencies versus heat frequencies that harm the body.
Yeah.
And then I took a Faraday blanket, and for your listeners who don't know what that is, it actually blocks any other frequency from coming in. So I'm cocooned by two mats, and I'm wrapped in a Faraday blanket, and
Wow.
I'm wearing a Faraday baseball cap. Okay.
Over what length of time? How long were your sessions?
Well, no science here. None. I just kept on pressing the button.
Wow.
Honestly, I just kept on pressing the button all day. And then I would recharge the mat, and then I'd do it again. And in after 4 days of doing that, again, no doctor, no science, just God. And just God, he's like, really? Okay. So he's like, really? Could you diss me anymore? So
I
so
just saved your life.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So on day 4, and the birds, I have two parrots, and they're underneath the mat with me.
I've met them. Wow. They
They're
know where the
underneath
good
the mat.
they know where the good stuff is.
Well, right, because they were impaired too,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they're smaller bodies,
Yeah.
right? They're this big.
Yeah.
So on day 4, I have enough blood flow because I don't have blood flow. When you're exposed to that high level of radiation, you lack blood flow in the areas where the radiation has hit. So in my case, it was mostly my brain, but obviously the whole body because I mentioned all those other areas. But I don't have blood flow in my brain. And um, so by day 4, I'm feeling I have enough strength, and I go to God, and I did divine intervention, and I went through every body part, and I prayed and begged him to heal me. And I was fine by day 12. Now, let me define fine. I'm walking, I can speaking, and I can process words. I will tell you that I couldn't process sentences. I would get very frustrated very quickly because I couldn't understand anything. Someone would like people, I couldn't understand anything people were saying because the signals weren't going. It was crazy. And so now it still took a full year, honestly, of using Rife frequencies and PEMF, proper nutrition, a lot of curcumin, which increases blood flow, right? N-acetylcysteine, also great for that. And then, but then I come back uh, and I break my wrist, this wrist right here, in 4 places. Okay. And I have an x-ray, and there's a before and after x-ray. The first x-ray, the bone was in place. It should have just healed, but it didn't. And the bone moved on the second x-ray. And the doctor said, well, we need to have surgery. And I said, no, that's not happening. I go, I'll just take care of it. He goes, well, if you can do that, he says, we can go into business together. I said, I already have a partner. God, right? So I came back in 9 weeks. Okay. And in 9 weeks, so typically it takes 9 weeks to heal a bone, and then they give you another 9 weeks for physical therapy. I did the whole thing in 9 weeks, moved the bone, healed the bone, and everything was functional in 9 weeks.
Wow. Wow.
So that wasn't the end. The last journey, that was longer. It took 21 months. Okay. And I'm really, this is the crux of the learning. I was, let me just hear if okay. So I'm just going to tell you that I was exposed to something that activated every single dormant virus in my body. And I had sores all over my body, almost like if I had the chicken pox or something. Now, I never had the chicken pox as a child because my mom had it with me when I was in her womb. Okay. So it took 21 months to heal. Why? Here's the crux of the book. Okay. My thoughts created the disease.
Yep.
So as long as I was thinking that my body wasn't good enough, whatever negative thought I had in my subconscious mind had to be released and healed and replaced with a positive thought.
Yeah.
And it took me 21 months, and God wasn't letting me off the hook. He's like, no, you need to do this because you need to show people what you can do when you give your brain the power that it deserves. And we've been led to believe that we're not as powerful as we are, but we are. We are so powerful. Our brain is powerful. And you don't have to die at age 60 or 70. You can live to 120 or more. Rant over. Go ahead.
God. No, that is amazing. Out of interest, my colleague Melanie just interviewed Josie Warren, sometimes referred to as the Hashimoto's expert. And she doesn't use any medications. She also had a horrendous journey in her life with health problems, that a whole range of multiple autoimmune conditions that were not dealt with by the allopathic medical system, and she is using purely emotions. And right at the heart of her solution is exactly what you have just said, that it's about changing thoughts. And fundamentally for her, let me just throw this one to you. The central element that they work with is to move the locus of control in someone's life back to that individual. Once we hand that to someone else, whether it's a doctor, whether it's a partner, whether it's a government, that is the process. We cannot heal properly when we have lost that locus of control. But fundamentally, you've got to fix the emotional state to be able to do that. Does that resonate with you?
Oh my God. Yeah, you can't be giving your power away,
Yeah.
right? And so look, let's look at very simple things. May I?
Yes, please. Please.
Okay. So the last chapter, let me just back up and say that the last chapter of this book is words. Let me just go here. Words are just vibrations in the ear. Okay. And this is the last chapter. Okay. Chapter 21. The artwork, by the way, is by my girlfriend, who's an international artist, and she's a cardiologist and a artist drawing hearts. So I explained that words have meanings more than the word itself. And when we look at the meaning of the word and the energy behind the word, it will drive the resonance of how it's received, not only by you, but by everyone around you and the furthest star in the universe. Now, let's use the word thank you. May I?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Do you feel the love? Or can you use the word thank you as an exit strategy? And I change my tone and go, thank you, right? So the energy that we bring to our words will drive how our cells respond. Okay. And not just your cells, but the cells of everyone else around you. And if you need evidence of that, you can look at Masaru Emoto's science experiment, right? And I encourage your listeners to go look that up. And basically, he studied water and the emotions on water and how it either distorts it or it becomes
I would guess that 80% of our listeners will know of Emoto's work.
yay. Okay. Okay.
But look, absolutely. So shifting mindsets, building self-awareness, these are all things that you talk about in your book, and fostering resilience.
Mm-hmm.
For me, those things are really fundamental, because if you go to a Western doctor,
Mm-hmm.
they're not going to do any of those things. So
No,
you,
I do those things. I mean, I'll teach you how to build resilience, and it's about finding the perfection of yourself, right? And we've been
you got a
trained.
lot of exercises. That's what I love about your book. You got a lot of exercises that really stimulate self-reflection, thought. It's very much a two-way. You like your two-way processes,
Mhm.
but your reading your book is about really engaging with it, and engaging with those exercises, and to deepen your understanding and to make it very relevant to your own life, because we're all individual.
Right, because I can't tell you there is no magic bullet, right? What did we say here? There's no magic bullet, no magic pill. You What people don't understand is that the work has to start with you. And you have to, okay, think about this. If you're listening, you can ask yourself, what are your relationships like? Okay. And if you can only love someone as deeply as you love yourself, okay, you can only understand someone as deeply as you understand yourself. And so, where does relationship start then? It starts with yourself. And when you understand who you are and what makes you tick, right? Then you can really get into a meaningful relationship with someone else. Because when they do something that rubs you wrong, instead of going and blaming and shaming someone for triggering you, you can instead step back and say, why does this trigger me? What happened to me in my as a kid, or in my case, I also look at past lives. Not everyone believes that, and that is okay. But I look at all lifetimes and what is it that's triggering me that I need to release within myself?
Yeah.
There's a free protocol for that on my website, and it's also in the book. It's called the All Clear Protocol. And you clear these frequencies from your field so that you can no longer be tethered to these old realities that don't really make sense to begin with.
Well, that brings me to, I've got a couple more questions because we need to wrap up shortly. But
Yeah.
you mentioned these old patterns. It's fundamental to your book and even its title. These old belief systems. what kind of old belief systems do us so much harm? And it implies that we need new belief systems that do us a lot of good. Talk to us about belief systems, not just emotions and thoughts, but belief systems. Something
Okay.
I've been interested in from a sort of neuroscience point of view for a long time as well.
Yeah, I mean, so like for instance, I was taught that the way that we heal is with a pill, that we don't have the ability to self-heal. But yet, as a kid, when I skinned my knee healed on its own. I didn't need a pill for that, right?
Mm.
So you have to look at also the roles that you play in a husband and wife relationship, right? What is your belief system? Does the man have to be the one working and the woman has to stay home? And if it's true for you, awesome. And if it works for you, awesome. But maybe it doesn't work, right? Maybe both people are working, or maybe the man staying home, which I've seen this many a time, the man staying home and taking care of the kids because that man happens to be more nurturing, and the woman's going out and making the money. Um, what about your belief system around food? Like, does food grow in the ground? I mean, we probably have several generations that thinks that food comes from a grocery store, but it
Mm.
doesn't. So these are little nuances, but we can't, our belief systems are formed early on in the lifetime, and then that becomes our reality. And it's based upon what your ancestors taught you, your mom, your dad, your grandparents, your siblings. It doesn't actually mean that it's true. It's just the environment that you grew up in. And so
Yeah,
then you have to choose
it's
for yourself what's true.
it then gets reinforced by experience, by data, information. And if we're surrounded by people who have the same belief system, we start to believe that that belief system represents truth when actually perhaps it doesn't. It just is,
Well, can I actually say this? This is a big one. This is huge. People believe that once they get a traumatic brain injury or they have a mental health condition, that they're stuck with that for the rest of their life. But the brain it has neuroplasticity. So I mean, I'm evidence of that, right? I mean, I had toxic brain. I had 4 brain tumors. How am I sitting here talking to you and holding on a decent conversation? How am
you
I
certainly are.
successful? What's that?
No, you certainly are doing very well. I mean, look, I haven't had a single brain tumor, but I'd be dead worried and probably dead if I had one. But four, that is really something.
Well, I had one in the basal ganglia.
Yeah.
I had one anchored into the pituitary gland, which is why I gained 50 pounds from it. And then I had two, one in each temporal lobe. And
Incredible.
so, and so,
So
um,
what on the cell phone front, how do you manage just daily? We live in a world in which new to nature EMFs from wireless devices like cell phones is basically going through the roof. We've got routers everywhere. We've got cell phones everywhere. We've got low orbit satellites beaming down. Uh, new to nature EMFs. How do we can't all live in a Faraday cage. How do you manage that?
So great question. I have multiple devices that I use and different modalities. So first of all, and I would encourage your listeners to reach out to me because we don't have time to go through all the modalities. I will tell you that there are cases for your cell phone that block most of the radiation. I also have stickers that neutralize, so when it comes out of the case, that neutralize the back of the phone. They're made with paramagnetic rare earth minerals.
Mm.
Minerals are your friend. I would just tell you, we could spend a whole show just on minerals. Okay. Um, I actually bathe in those minerals. And the reason I do that is because it gets infused into my cells. And then I'm safer, never safe, but safer walking down the street. I also wear a wearable pulse electromagnetic frequency device around me. So I have a bubble around me.
Okay.
Um, and I'm constantly using the PEMF device. I use red light. I'm using Rife machines. I'm doing everything to keep that blood flowing. Because at the end of the day, the radiation is clumping your red blood cells. So your goal is to mitigate and eliminate. Okay. And I have tons of videos on my YouTube channel at Suson Essentials, self care, which you are on. And there this is a conversation that could take literally hours. But I will tell you that there are a multitude of solutions. Again, not a magic bullet, and you have to be conscious about where you're spending your time. And of course, for the free stuff, I connect to Earth. You know,
Amazing. Amazing. Jody, I mean, you've given a lot of different options that people can use. And as you say, there are multiple strategies. And we know that those strategies have to be personalized. So I just want to finish off and ask you, are there three things that everyone should be doing it as a kind of priority? If you give someone a list of 25 things, they might do three. Are there three things that people can think about that really protect us, that really help in this self-transformation journey of body, mind, and spirit?
yep, three things. Okay, number one, filter your water.
Mm,
Okay, keep the minerals in. Number two, increase your mineral intake, because that's how you connect to each other and how you connect to God. And number three, pray. Start praying, and and actually, I'm going to give number four. Just eat clean.
yeah.
Okay.
You can give number five as well,
Yeah.
but not six. Don't go to six because that's too much for people.
Yeah, right. But I mean, but eat clean, right? Don't remove all the toxicity
Yeah.
from your food and water supply. But if you um and when I said pray, pray for your food. Somebody gave up their life, whether it's a plant life or physical life, and praying actually changes the DNA. So you
Mm.
might as well pray for the food, pray for yourself, get yourself into a parasympathetic state, and get your body ready to consume food, but through prayer.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Jody, it's been extraordinary. Your book, Emotional Healing, Toxic Free Living, Model New Behaviors and Reset Old Belief Systems. There it is.
And the workbook, because you can
Where people, where I think it's you can buy it on Amazon. Have you got other sites that people can use to buy it?
So we're very close to launching it through Ingram Spark, where they're taking it to 40,000 different locations. So it should be in bookstores and every online store around within probably 10 days or less. So
Amazing. Well, we are so grateful at A&H that we are one of the organizations that will receive a portion of the royalties.
yes,
Jody, that is hugely kind of you to do that. The resonance is very high. The gratitude from us towards you is huge. Thank you. And
well,
please,
and the thing is, let me go back and
yeah,
say, what you have done for years to protect our rights to natural health is beyond.
thank you.
And, you know, I don't want to be crying. So, because it just feels like,
It's another two-way street. So
thank you.
So, Reverend Jody, it's been fantastic to have you on Speaking Naturally. Please, people, go out there and engage. This is not just a book you read, it's a book you engage with. And it's about self transformation, it's about reconnecting mind, body, and crucially, spirit. Jody, thank you so much for being on Speaking Naturally.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Rob. You're amazing. You're
Thank you.
amazing. And what you do and what you've created is amazing. So
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you.